Hey y'all, it's Kreeby. So you know that feeling when you're home alone at night and the house just starts making noises? Yeah, tonight's not gonna help with that. I've got 3 stories people have shared with me, and honestly, after reading these, I started checking my own locks. Let's get into it. The first footstep landed directly above my head at 2:14 in the morning. I know the exact time because I checked my phone the moment I heard it, which is the kind of thing I do. I document. I verify. My aunt's house is a 1987 ranch style with a second-floor addition built in the mid-90s. The attic sits above that addition, above the bedroom I was using, and it has been sealed since 2019. I know this because my aunt told me, and because I'd looked at the hatch myself when I arrived Thursday afternoon. 16 drywall screws painted over. Nobody had opened that hatch in years. The paint around the screws was unbroken. The footstep was slow, deliberate, not a structural creak from cooling wood, not the random tick of a settling beam. I've stayed in old houses. I know those sounds. This had weight behind it. Pause. Then another step. Then another. Moving from the east wall toward the center of the attic, roughly tracking the path from the window to the hatch, at a pace I can only describe as careful. I sat up and did not move for 43 seconds. I counted. My first rational thought was animal. Raccoons get into attics in rural subdivisions constantly. The Hendersons 2 lots over had dealt with one the previous spring. I pulled up my aunt's contact in my phone and typed out a quick message. Is there any chance there's been an animal problem in the attic? Hearing movement above the guest room. I didn't call because it was past 2 in the morning and she was in Ohio managing her mother's estate, and I didn't want to alarm her over a raccoon. The steps stopped. I waited. 1 minute. 2. I set my phone down on the nightstand and started talking myself through it methodically. The house was old. Temperature dropped sharply after sunset, probably 15 degrees since I'd arrived home from the gas station. Differential contraction in the roof joists could produce, in theory, a rhythmic sound. It wasn't rhythmic. I noted that and set it aside. At the 4-minute mark, I got up, put on my shoes, and went to get a flashlight from the kitchen. That's when I noticed the hallway door. I had left it open. I leave interior doors open when I sleep alone in unfamiliar houses, specifically because I want to hear the full acoustic range of the building. It is a habit I developed after a carbon monoxide scare in a rental in 2018, where the alarm was in the hallway and I nearly slept through it because the bedroom door was closed. The hallway door was closed. I stood in front of it for a moment, then opened it. The hallway was dark. The bathroom door at the end, which I had also left open, was closed. I turned on the flashlight and walked down the hall, opened the bathroom door, confirmed it was empty, and then turned and looked at the stairwell door on my left. Closed. I had left it open. I had specifically propped it with the small ceramic dog from the hallway shelf because the latch was loose and the door tended to drift. The ceramic dog was sitting on the floor beside the wall, upright, undamaged. The door was closed. I called my aunt. I know I said I wouldn't, but this was no longer a raccoon question. She answered on the 3rd ring, voice thick with sleep. I told her what I'd heard. I told her about the doors. I kept my voice even. She was quiet for a moment and then said, "The doors do that sometimes. There's a draft from the crawl space vent. It moves through the house when the temperature drops." I should have warned you. I said, "All 3 doors?" At the same time, another pause. She said, "Maybe check the locks." I checked the locks. Front door, deadbolted. Back door, deadbolted. The sliding glass door off the dining room, locked, and the security bar was seated in the track. Every window on the ground floor was latched. I confirmed each one and typed the results into my phone's notes app as I went, because that is how I process information. Writing it down makes it real or it makes it dismissible, and I needed it to be one or the other. I was standing in the dining room, looking at the sliding door, when the footsteps resumed, slower this time, and tracking deliberately from the center of the attic back toward the east wall. Back the way they had come. I watched the ceiling as they moved. The drywall flexed slightly with each step, a barely perceptible bow in the paint. and I marked the position and tracked it with my eyes until the steps reached the east wall and stopped. I stood there with my flashlight pointed at a patch of ceiling above the dining room table. Then I heard, from directly above me, approximately 18 inches above my head, a sound I have not been able to categorize. It was not a voice. It was not an animal sound. It was low and controlled and lasted maybe 3 seconds, and the closest I can come to describing it is the sound of someone exhaling with deliberate, measured pressure through their nose. The kind of breath you take when you are trying not to make noise. I called 911. The officers arrived in 11 minutes. 2 of them. I walked them through everything I had documented. They were thorough, I'll give them that. One of them went up to the second floor, examined the hatch, confirmed the screws, pressed on the drywall panel, and confirmed it was solid. He came back downstairs and told me the attic was inaccessible. They checked the perimeter of the house and found nothing. They left at 3:40 in the morning. I did not sleep. At first light, I went back upstairs with my phone and photographed the attic hatch. All 16 screws, painted over, undisturbed. I photographed the window at the east end of the attic hallway, which was latched from the inside. I went outside and looked up at the roofline. The exterior vent cover on the east face of the house, a slatted plastic cap about 14 inches across, was intact. I sent the photos to my aunt along with a detailed written summary of the night. She called me an hour later, and I could tell from her voice she was choosing her words carefully. She said the attic had been sealed because of a legal matter. She said she would explain when she got home. She said she was sorry she hadn't said something before I arrived. I asked her what the legal matter was. She said a man had been living up there. Off and on, she thought, for somewhere between 8 and 14 months before she found out. He had been accessing the space through the vent cover, which had a hinge he'd installed himself. She had it professionally sealed after he was removed from the property. I asked when that was. She said March of 2019. I told her the vent cover on the east face looked intact to me from the outside that morning. She said that was the west face she'd had sealed. She had never thought to check whether there was a second vent. I went back outside immediately. I stood in the dead November grass and looked up at the east face of the roof. The vent cover up there had 4 screws visible on the frame, but when I zoomed my camera in, I could see that the bottom 2 screw heads had no slot marks. They were painted wooden plugs shaped to look like screws. The cover swung inward on a hinge at the top. Someone had built themselves a second door, and based on what I heard at 2:14 that morning, they already knew I was in the house before I knew they were. The fridge seal popped while I was in the shower, and I know exactly what that sounds like. I want to be clear about that before anything else. I've lived in that apartment for 4 years. I know every sound that place makes. The elevator cable hum at 2 a.m. The specific creak on the 4th step of the interior staircase. The way the bathroom pipes knock once when the heat kicks on. And that fridge, a 2019 Kenmore with a gasket that started sticking sometime around last winter, makes a sound when you open it that is genuinely unique. It's not just a seal breaking. It's a slow, reluctant peel, almost wet, and then a kind of exhale. I've opened that fridge maybe 3,000 times. I know what it sounds like. I heard it at 11:07 p.m. on a Friday while I had shampoo in my hair and both of my roommates were in different states. Marcus was in Cincinnati for his cousin's wedding. I'd helped him carry his bag to the Uber that morning. Priya was in Portland for a work conference. She'd asked me to water her one plant, a little succulent on the windowsill named Gerald. I'd watered Gerald that afternoon. I was completely alone in a 3rd-floor apartment in a building where you need a key fob to enter the lobby, a key for the stairwell, and another key for the unit itself. So when I heard the fridge, I turned off the water and stood there dripping on the shower mat and did what any reasonable person does. I started explaining it to myself. Old appliances make noise. Gaskets can release pressure on their own, right? Temperature differential. Some mechanical thing I don't fully understand. I told myself that and I believed it maybe 40%. I dried off, pulled on the sweatpants and t-shirt I'd left on the toilet lid, and walked down the hall toward the kitchen. The overhead light was off, same as I'd left it. The under-cabinet strip light was on, same as I'd left it. The window above the sink showed the back of the building across the alley. Everything exactly as it should be, except for the plate on the counter. It was my plate. White ceramic with a small chip on the rim that I've been meaning to replace for 2 years. On it was the pasta I'd made Tuesday night, linguine with a tomato and olive situation, which I had put in a glass container in the fridge after dinner with the intention of eating it for lunch on Saturday. It was now sitting on the counter under the cabinet light, and roughly a third of it was gone. There was a fork resting across the rim at an angle, the way you set a fork down when you're pausing, not finished. I stood there for what was probably 10 seconds and did not move. Then I started checking, because that's what I do. I checked the front door, deadbolt and chain, both engaged from the inside. I walked through every room. I got down and looked under both beds. I opened every closet, including the small one in the hallway that's mostly Marcus's ski gear and a vacuum cleaner. I checked behind the shower curtain, which I had obviously just come from, but I checked it anyway. I even looked on the small balcony, which requires stepping over a stuck track and which nobody ever uses because it looks directly into the office of the accounting firm across the street. Nothing. No one. The apartment was empty. I called Marcus. He picked up on the third ring with music behind him. "Hey, you good? Are you in Cincinnati?" Pause. "Yeah. What's wrong?" "Nothing," I said. "Sorry. Enjoy the wedding." I don't know why I didn't tell him. I think I was still in the part of my brain that was going to figure this out rationally and not need to tell anyone anything. I hung up and stood in the kitchen and looked at the plate. Here is what I could not explain away. The pasta was cold when I'd put it in the fridge. If I had sleepwalked, which I have never done in my life, I would have eaten cold pasta, and I don't believe that. The pasta on the plate was warm. Not hot, not steaming, but the way food is warm when it's been recently heated. And there was a smell in the kitchen, faint but present, the specific smell of the microwave after something's been in it. That sharp, slightly stale heat smell. I walked over and opened the microwave, and the inside was warm. The turntable had a faint tomato smear on it that I had not put there. Someone had been in my kitchen, used my microwave, eaten my food, and left the plate on the counter like they lived there. Like they had every right to it. I went back to the front door and stood there with my hand on the deadbolt for a long time. The deadbolt that I had engaged from the inside. The chain that does not engage itself. I was trying to build a version of events where this made sense, where there was a mundane answer I hadn't considered, and I couldn't get there. I'm not a person who jumps to conclusions. I work in insurance. I review claims for a living. My entire job is finding the explanation that fits the evidence, and the explanation here was the one I did not want. I pulled the couch in front of the door. I sat on it with my phone in my hand, and I did not sleep. In the morning, I called the building super and asked him to check if anyone else had a key to our unit. He looked it up and told me that 2 weeks ago, a locksmith had been called to our building by someone claiming to be a tenant who'd lost their key. The locksmith had rekeyed 3 units. Ours was one of them. The super had a new key made for our lock and changed it that same day. I got new copies for Marcus and Priya. But here is what I keep coming back to, the thing that actually keeps me awake. The deadbolt was engaged from the inside. So was the chain. If someone used a key to get in, they could not have locked both of those from outside when they left. Those locks only work from inside the apartment, which means whoever was in my kitchen that night did not leave before I started checking the rooms. They were still there while I was looking. They were quiet enough, patient enough, to wait while I got down on my knees and looked under the beds, while I opened every closet, while I checked the balcony. They stood somewhere in the apartment I had already searched and did not breathe loud enough for me to hear them. And then, sometime after I dragged the couch in front of the door and sat on it facing the hallway with every light on, they were gone. I still don't know how. The knock came at 1 a.m., and I was already awake because I'd heard something that wasn't quite a sound, more like a pressure change. The kind of thing that makes you pull your feet off the floor without knowing why. I rent a split level on Darnell Street, one of those homes where the main floor sits raised and the basement is half underground, half exposed to the backyard slope. I moved in 8 months ago. The landlord, a retired guy named Carver who manages the property through email and doesn't visit, told me during the walkthrough that the previous tenant had left some personal belongings in the basement and that someone would be by to collect them. Nobody ever came. The door at the bottom of the main stairwell has a deadbolt on my side, and I keep it locked. Not because Carver asked me to, because I never had a reason to go down there, and after a few months of nobody collecting anything, I stopped thinking about it almost entirely. Almost. 3 knocks. Slow. Spaced about 2 seconds apart. Not frantic, not urgent. Deliberate, like someone making sure they were being heard rather than trying to alarm anyone. They came from the other side of that basement door. I was sitting on my couch with my laptop open, grading lab reports for the community college where I teach intro chemistry. I heard the first knock and thought it was the house settling. By the third, I was standing up without remembering the decision to stand. My chest went tight in that specific way it does when your body understands something before your brain catches up. Not panic yet, just the sudden, awful knowledge that something is wrong and you haven't figured out the shape of it. I stood in the middle of my living room for probably 90 seconds, which felt much longer, and I listened. Nothing else. The refrigerator hum, traffic outside, my own breathing, which was too shallow. My first thought was an animal. A raccoon or a possum that had gotten in through a basement window. We have wildlife in this neighborhood, and those old half-underground basements have gaps in the framing sometimes. I pulled up Carver's number on my phone and typed out a message. Did the previous tenant stuff ever get cleared out? I think something got into the basement. I hit send and then stood there watching the screen like he was going to respond at 1 a.m. on a Tuesday. He didn't. I went to the kitchen and stood in front of the basement door. It's a hollow core interior door, and looking at it now, I realized how thin it was. Whatever was on the other side, if something was on the other side, it was maybe 1.5 inches of pressed wood away from me. The deadbolt was still thrown. I'd locked it myself that morning out of pure muscle memory on my way to the fridge. I put my ear close to the door, not touching it, not quite. Silence. I called my friend Dana, who grew up in a rural area and has handled more than her share of wildlife situations. She picked up on the 4th ring, groggy, and I explained what happened. 3 knocks, she repeated. 3 knocks. Animals don't knock, Sam. I know that. Okay, but raccoons will absolutely push on things, she said. If there's like a loose panel or something, they can make a rhythmic sound trying to get through. Have you gone down to look? I told her I hadn't. You should look, she said. If something's down there, you need to know. Take a broom handle. I didn't take a broom handle. I took a flashlight and my phone and I stood at the door for another minute before I reached for the deadbolt. The metal was cold. My hand was colder. I turned the lock, felt the bolt slide back, and pulled the door open. The stairwell was dark. There's a pull-string light bulb at the bottom of the stairs, the old style, a single bare bulb on a cord. I shone the flashlight down and swept it across the stairs, across the boxes stacked against the far wall, across the concrete floor. Nothing moved. Anything? Dana asked in my ear. I don't see anything, I said. I'm going to go down and check the windows. I went down. Each step was cold through my socks, and the air smelled like old cardboard and something faintly mineral, like wet concrete. The boxes were exactly as I'd always imagined them. Unlabeled, stacked in 2 uneven columns. The basement windows, 2 of them at ground level, were both latched from the inside. No gaps in the frames that I could find running my hands along the edges. No droppings on the floor. No scratches on the concrete. Nothing had been down there. Nothing that came in from outside, anyway. I stood at the bottom of the stairs and breathed and tried to let my heart rate come down. Dana, I said. The windows are sealed. Okay, there's nothing down here. She was quiet for a second. Then come back upstairs. I turned to go up. That's when my flashlight caught the pull string for the light bulb, and I stopped. The string was tied to the inside handle of the basement door, which was still hanging open above me. I want to be precise about what I mean. The pull string for that bulb is about 18 inches long, just enough to grab from a normal standing height. It has a small plastic toggle at the end, but the string had been extended with something, a length of thin cord, the white cotton kind you'd use to tie up a box or hang something. It ran from the toggle upward, up past the bulb, across to the wall, looped around a nail I'd never noticed before, and then stretched all the way up the stairwell to the door handle where it was tied off in a neat bowl and knot. If I had pulled that door shut behind me on the way down, the string would have pulled taut. The light would have turned on. Someone had rigged it so that closing the basement door from the inside would turn the light on automatically. Someone had built a system for being in that basement in the dark and having the light come on the moment the door above them closed. I went back upstairs so fast I caught my shin on the top step and didn't feel it until I was already in the kitchen with the deadbolt thrown again. I told Dana what I'd seen and she told me to call the police, which I did. They came, they checked the basement, they found no one there. They confirmed the cord was tied the way I described. One of the officers said the knot was well made. What I keep coming back to is this. The cord was dusty along the wall where it looped around the nail. Not recently strung. It had been there for a while. Long enough to collect dust. Long enough that whoever rigged it had been using it, had been coming down there in the dark and closing the door and waiting for the light, and had been doing it long before I knocked 3 times on their door by accident that night. I locked the deadbolt. They knocked back. Alright, that's gonna do it for tonight. If you've ever been home alone and heard something you couldn't explain, drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Stay subscribed if you want more of this stuff. And as always, friends, keep the lights on.